Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Critical Reasoning. And in today's video, we are going to talk about argument basics. So, one of the first things that we want to bear in mind when it comes to assessing arguments, thinking about arguments, evaluating arguments, looking at good reasons for supporting certain arguments, is that we want to make a distinction between what we might call rhetoric and arguments. So, if you remember from the introduction welcome video, I talked a little bit about how the term arguments that we're using in this class is much different than the way that we mean it when we're speaking like in regular conversation, everyday life. This class is a philosophy class, and in philosophy, we use the term arguments to refer to a specific process by which we give reasons to support conclusions. Essentially, they're the reasons that we give as philosophers for supporting certain things that we're saying are true, maybe defending a certain moral principle, making a claim about what it is to know something, etc. Now, that process, which we're going to learn about the first stages about how to do that, how to look at that, how to evaluate that for today. That process is one that is much different than what we might call rhetoric. So, rhetoric, if you're familiar with like people maybe saying, I'm not sure how often you hear this. I feel like this is a little dated, but people often, a while ago at least, used to say, that's just rhetoric. Somebody's making a claim about something and they go, that's just rhetoric, right? And what that kind of statement is meant to express when this term rhetoric is used in this dismissive sort of way is that rhetoric is about the win. It's about persuasive, about the persuasive manner in which you present a particular argument. And all rhetoric is focused on is trying to persuade the audience. So sometimes rhetoric might utilize good reasons, might utilize argumentation, if you will, in order to persuade others to win. But rhetoric is just about that persuasion bit. So if you're maybe familiar with, say, like high school debate teams, right? This idea of like a debate team in high school or in college. Those kinds of debates, that kind of format where you have pro and against, they're competitions. They're all about the win. It's all about persuading the judges, to buy their side of the argument. And this in and of itself is kind of a neutral thing. It's not inherently bad, right? Especially when you can utilize rhetoric to convince people that they should do something or that a particular thing is good, for instance. When we think about the way that information surrounding climate change or the need to get the COVID vaccine is being presented, right? They can utilize rhetoric, maybe appealing to the audience's emotions or maybe the audience's sense of duty to others, right? Like saying, think about when it comes to climate change, maybe trying to get people to curb some of their behaviors or write letters to their local representatives to get them to, implement certain climate policy changes, using rhetoric to sort of get people to maybe take action to help mitigate some of the effects of climate change by maybe like appealing to their emotions, saying, think of your children, think of future generations, that sort of thing, to persuade them, not necessarily that it's just a good argument, but that they should take action, right? To do something good. It can be a good thing. Now, Rhetoric is mostly a problem though when people present only the claims that support their position. And more often than not, when we're in a debate with someone, say we're in a fight with someone we're in like a romantic relationship with or a family member or something like this, we have this tendency, this bias towards really only giving the evidence that strongly supports the claim that we're trying to make, right? Like if you get really annoyed because your partner or say like your sibling regularly interrupts you, you're just gonna list off probably a bunch of examples to say, hey, you always interrupt me, right? Now, it's probably not the case. I'm sure that each and every one of you watching this can imagine an example where of an argument, you've had or someone's had with you, something like that was said, like you always interrupt me, or you never listen, right? And to support that argument, someone would in that kind of position, especially when emotions are high, is going to appeal to, last week when we were, out to dinner with a bunch of people, I was trying to talk about, this experience that I had or whatever, you interrupted me. Or when I was trying to tell you that the last time I was like really upset with you for not responding to my text message, you interrupted me, right? Just citing evidence that supports our conclusion. And yes, that's rhetoric. And using rhetoric in a way where maybe like you're listing off a bunch of, really intense moments where somebody you're kind of in an argument or disagreement with is interrupting you. Doing it in that way is just meant to persuade the person, like convince them, they always interrupt you. They've got to stop doing it, right? And although, there might be other factors in a situation where like that kind of behavior using rhetoric in that way is justified, in principle, when it comes to forming good arguments, that's not the aim that we're trying to, that's not the aim that that's not what we're going for. That's not the purpose. What we want to do when we're forming good arguments, again, arguments in this sense of how philosophers use it, is we want to provide really strong reasons, good reasons for believing certain facts about the world are true. So if we want to return again, maybe to that example of, you always interrupt me, instead of that point being saying something along the lines, instead of that being the conclusion, saying, you regularly interrupt me when we're in disagreements, and then pointing to a number of disagreements where, you were really needing to make a point and then the person was just speaking over you and interrupting you. And then from there saying, when you're doing that and we get in these kinds of disagreements, that really sets me off because I feel like I'm not heard, right? Like, conclusion, can you please try to hold back this habit you have of interrupting me when we're in an argument, right? Or we're in a disagreement rather. There you have actually an example of a pretty strong argument. You're like thinking about the other person's position. You're looking for evidence that goes outside of the things that you're most biased towards, the things that you want to bring up, and you're drawing a little bit more of a softer or less extreme conclusion when you, instead of saying, you always interrupt me, saying something more along the lines of like, this is something that I've noticed regularly happens and it really undermines our ability to like communicate when, we're both feeling upset. So that latter kind of response, that is one that we can think of as an argument in the philosophical sense, where the aim there is to give good reasons, not just convince, not just persuade, but give good reasons for thinking certain facts about the world are true. All right. So we're going to introduce some formal terminology here. These are the ways that these are the terms that philosophers use to describe the bits and pieces that make up this philosophical sense of the term argument. Okay. So these arguments are made up of propositions. What are propositions? Propositions are true or false statements. They're like statements about facts of the matter, right? Matter, you can think of as like in the science, like the way scientists talk about it, like physical matter. So matter in the world. So propositions, again, are true or false statements about facts of the matter, facts of the world. And there are two kinds of propositions. There are premises, which reflect the reasons, so that's facts of the matter, that support a further premise, a further proposition, being the conclusion about something concerning the world. So these are the terms. So premises are the propositions. Just to say that again, it was maybe a little confusing the first time around. So just so you can read that bit. So an argument is made up of premises that supports a conclusion, where premises function as, or premises sort of can be laid out as a list, like 1, 2, 3, 4, list of reasons to believe what the conclusion, so the proposition in the conclusion, that claim about a fact of the matter, a fact of the world. The premises are the reasons that we give for saying that this conclusion that we're drawing is true. Now, initially, you might think, why introduce all of this complex terminology? Why can't we just say that you have some propositions that support a conclusion? And there are a number of complicated reasons for this, but this is more to give you a sense of the terminology. So, in the event, maybe you go on to another philosophy class and then there's other academic contexts where this kind of terminology is used, you'll be familiar with it. You'll understand, okay, propositions can cover pretty much like any old thing that somebody says is true about the world. And premises in particular are sort of this subcategory of propositions that function as reasons for supporting a conclusion, where the conclusion is also a subcategory of propositions that function within an argument, or rather, the conclusion is part of an argument that is supported on the basis of those reasons you list above. Okay, again, I know it's complicated, but bear with me, you'll get some practice looking at this, and probably, once you try to see it in practice, once you see, exactly the form in which we lay out arguments in the way I just described, it'll start to make a little bit more sense. All right, so let's apply it. Let's give an example. All right, so we have an argument here. This is an argument, again, in the philosophical sense. Identical twins sometimes have different IQ scores, yet twins inherit exactly the same genes. So environment must play some part in determining a person's IQ. All right, so I'm going to go through the method for breaking down arguments. That is, coming up with these lists of reasons for supporting the conclusion you write out in the end. And as I'll explain, the first thing that you want to do is to identify the main take-home point, the conclusion of the argument. So perhaps pause the video for a moment and think about what the main take-home message / conclusion you think is in this person's argument. All right. And then from there, think about, so once you've, pause video, whatever, thought about what you think that, the conclusion is in this argument here, think about what the reasons might be that this person is giving us for supporting that conclusion. Okay. How would we write that out? So if you remember, I was saying we have those lists of reasons, the premises listed above the conclusion. Okay, so the conclusion to this argument is that the environment must play some part in determining our IQ. What are the reasons for this? Well, identical twins often have different IQ test scores, but identical twins inherit the same genes, right? So the only other factor, what you might think of as like an implicit premise here, is that the only other thing that impacts someone's IQ score is the environment that they grew up in. Therefore, the environment must play some role in determining a person's IQ. Okay, so I mentioned this before. I'm going to go through it again. I'm going to repeat a lot in this video just to give everyone a heads up, because as soon as you dig into some of the assignments in this module period, while I'm sure that when you're watching this video, doing the other required course materials in this module period, you're going to feel like it's all crystal, and then you sit down to do it and you're going to go, wait, how do I do this again? So running through it again, steps to breaking down an argument. The first thing we want to do is identify the conclusion. And then, so we want to identify the take-home message, the main point, right, that that person is trying to make. And then from there, we identify the premises or reasons that that person gives us to believe that the conclusion of the argument is true, that we should buy it, that we should buy the take-home message that they're trying to send us. Okay, so when we're breaking down an argument, we should be asking ourselves what a speaker or the writer or whomever is trying to do, right? Like the person who's giving us this argument. What is the particular position, maybe course of action, maybe claim about the way the world is, something like this, something that exists in the world? What is it? What are they trying to convince us of? And from there, or rather, one tool that will really help us, and this is something that that was covered in the readings for this module period, is that we can look for certain indicators in a sentence, certain things like when we're, somebody writes out their argument, we can look for certain words that kind of signal when somebody is telling us the conclusion of their argument. So these kind of indicators, these words, these terms that indicate where a conclusion is in an argument are terms like therefore, thus, hence, so, consequently. This shows that, and I'm sure you could think of more beyond that. So one thing that I want to say really quickly about this term therefore, because I see students use it a lot. Like, I would think that a lot of you watching the video have just written therefore as a sort of, it just felt right. You're like writing a paper and you feel like you're saying a few things and you're like, therefore, da, 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 da. And I'd like to urge you to really sort of like, have a little alarm bell go off. Try to set a little alarm bell in your mind for when you feel that word, that urge to use that word. Because really, across all academic disciplines, this term, therefore, is always used to signify or indicate or mark, like, here, I'm about to make a conclusion to my argument, right? So you really only want to use that word, and this most certainly goes for this class, and I urge you to do the same when you're writing papers for other classes. You really only want to use that word therefore when that is like when you're hitting maybe the like thesis statement to a research paper. It's something that you use to signify saying like, hey, I'm giving you reasons X, Y, and Z. Given reasons X, Y, and Z, therefore my conclusion, therefore my thesis statement, that sort of thing. So just being really mindful of when you're using that term in particular. Other terms these other terms sort of sometimes can get used interchangeably with just like, because of this thing, then this thing happened. But while at the very least, so you don't have to worry about those terms. The big one to be careful with is therefore. With these other terms, though, the reason why I'm sort of marking them as indicators, and I had you, do some readings that talk about how these are indicators of a conclusion, is to really just sort of help you get a good sense of when, you're reading an argument, you've hit the conclusion to the author, writer, speaker's argument. All right, so that's the first step. Step number one, first thing you want to do is identify the conclusion. You want to kind of skip to the main point or the main point that someone's trying to make. All right. So one example of this. Since it's always wrong to kill a human being, it therefore follows that capital punishment is wrong because capital punishment kills a human being. So while you are practicing, you are going to notice that conclusions don't always get neatly tucked in at the end. Sometimes they do, oftentimes they don't. Especially like when you're thinking about writing like a research paper, something like this, you have your conclusion, that thesis statement in the in the introduction, in the very beginning, right? Like academic writing is all about, spoiling the end, getting to the point, letting your reader know, where it is that you're going. And sometimes the way that might get wrapped up in a statement, it's not going to just fit ever so nicely and neatly at the end, like a movie, right? It can be oftentimes, at the very beginning of someone's argument. So here, right, we have something like that. So if you want to think for a minute, what identify the conclusion indicator, and then from there, just mark in your mind what the conclusion of this argument is. So, right, we have the word therefore that indicates that, the conclusion of this particular argument is that capital punishment is wrong. All right. So step number two, we've identified we've sort of started to wrap our minds around how to identify conclusions. This next step we take once we do that, so like once you found that therefore, something like this, you want to identify the premises. And the reason why we do that is we're sort of like, once we've gotten the spoiler, right, we know where the person's going with what the main point they're trying to make. We want to then do a sort of careful step-by-step analysis of the reasons that that person is giving us to think that their conclusion is true. Okay, so premise indicators. There are a bunch of indicators out there. And sometimes you'll see these indicators to help you identify premises, and sometimes you won't. But these are words, things like because, since, given that, for so-and-so, on the grounds that, this follows from, right? That kind of language. Oftentimes, though, you're really not going to get any indicator for premises. People are going to just state certain facts. And those facts, once you look at the argument on the whole, you'll see like, okay, these are reasons for thinking that this main point this person is trying to make is true. And as you're going to see, this is just something that is going to take practice. Again, I just mentioned the premise indicators to kind of give you a sense of, or a feel for, what premises look like in a particular argument. They don't always show up just in the same way, unfortunately, that conclusion indicators don't always show up. All right, now let's look at that. Another example to help sort of solidify some of the stuff that we're thinking about here with respect to identifying the premises. All right. Since everyone deserves health care and more than 40 million Americans don't have health insurance, The United States should thus institute national insurance. Okay. Now, again, this is just an example. This isn't, you're not learning, if anybody, if you're watching right now and you're feeling like you have a really strong opinion, like you strongly agree with this or you strongly disagree with this, part of what we're doing today, hopefully, is being able to sort of tease out the main points in an argument like this one, look at the reasons, and then say, if you disagree with the argument, finding good reasons to reject their reasons. Okay. So, all right. If you want to pause the video for a moment and see if you can just think about the reasons that, or rather, if you want to pause the video for a moment and see if you can identify any premise indicators in this example, and then just sort of clock in your mind, like, all right, these are the reasons for supporting the argument. All right, since, right? We see since. Now, a couple of you might be, doing the right thing here and going like, wait, what about step one, right? Don't we need to identify the conclusion first? So for those of you going in that direction, you'll also notice that we don't have any conclusion indicators here, right? But it's not too hard to identify. You still, like what I was talking about just a second ago, like getting a feel for where these things show up, even if they don't have the right indicators. You can still probably have a feeling about what the conclusion of the argument might be. And here, it's this point that the United States should institute national insurance, right? So this person's arguing for universal health care. And the reason that they give is that everyone deserves it and a ton of people in the United States don't have it. Okay, so what's our option for getting it to them? Look to the government, right? Like, so here, I'm assuming you all have probably heard arguments very similar to this concerning this particular subject. And this is a perfect example of somebody, trying to construct a well-formed argument, give some good reasons for supporting a belief that they have is true. Okay, so to just see it in the argument form. So when I'm saying things like, how do we break down an argument? What I am talking about is, or rather, when I say breaking down an argument, what I am talking about is coming up with that list of the reasons that one line, number one, reason number one, reason number two, followed at the end by, and it could be reason number 3, 4, 5, depends on the length of the argument, how many reasons were given for supporting the conclusion. But then at the end, at the very, very end, on the bottom line, you have the conclusion. So like I said just a second ago, the conclusion of that argument concerning universal health care is that the United States government should institute it. Right. And then, like I also said, the reasons that the person gives for supporting that conclusion is that everyone deserves healthcare and that over 40 million people in the US don't have it. Right. And the way that we break down the argument is using the form that you see here. So premise number one, everyone deserves healthcare. Premise number two, more than 40 million Americans don't have it. Then, given those two reasons, therefore, or thus, the United States, so the conclusion, the United States should institute national health insurance or implement universal health care. All right. Okay, so because as you're going to see on the practice sheet and then later on the module period, the module worksheet, arguments are going to take on a lot of different forms. These little blocks of text are going to look different almost every single time. And the main goal at least in learning these argument basics, is going to be identifying, again, that take-home message, that main point, the conclusion that someone is making in their argument, and distinguishing that conclusion from the reasons that they give for supporting the conclusion. Because once we separate those two things, then we have a much easier time evaluating whether or not they've given us good reasons for thinking the thing they're saying is true. Because if you remember all the way back in the beginning of this video, I was talking about, how like rhetoric is like just aimed at the win. It's all about persuasion, not necessarily given good reasons. Rhetoric can really take hold of us, can kind of manipulate us sometimes, like appealing to our emotions, triggering us with certain things in order to make us believe a conclusion is true without giving us good reason for believing that conclusion is true. So although this process might seem a little tedious, listing out reason number one, reason number two, okay, dot. If you can figure out how to do it with your word processor, you could write those 3 little dots or just write conclusion. Spelling all of that stuff out in detail, it might feel a little tedious. It might feel a little unnecessary. But I promise you, once we separate that main point, getting in the habit of separating that main point from the reasons someone is giving us to agree with that conclusion, and then that is what allows us to really get in there and evaluate, okay, reason number 1, is that a good reason? Reason number 2, is that a good reason, right? Okay, so let's think about this and practice a little bit. We have this claim. I've definitely heard it before. I'm assuming some of you have also. Professors shouldn't give their student grades on their assignments because grades create bad incentives and they don't provide any useful feedback. Okay, so when we break this down, right, even though we didn't see any of those little, the indicators, right, and we didn't see any premise indicators, we didn't see any conclusion indicators, but there's you can kind of get a feel for an idea, like maybe where a therefore or a thus should have been, right? Or what the main take-home message should be, or the main take-home message that this person is trying is arguing for, right? And that is actually, like I was saying, it always doesn't follow the right formula, right? That's the first little bit in the beginning. They give you the spoiler right away. Professors shouldn't give their students grades on assignments. Shouldn't do like A, B, C, D, right? They create bad incentives. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is that they don't provide any useful feedback. Okay, so now that we've like separated out this claim, the conclusion, take-home message that professors shouldn't give grades, we can start to think about, how good of a reason it is to believe that, to think that's true, based off of this idea that grades create bad incentives. All right, so we want to dig in. I bet a few of you are wondering, what makes it a bad incentive? How so, right? Like if students are just like fighting to get that A, shouldn't that motivate them? Shouldn't it help them, right? Conversely, you might think like, well, I can understand what this person is arguing for. If the student is only caring about getting a good grade, they're not going to try to be maybe learning how to do the things that that the professor is trying to teach them. Maybe taking the pressure off this incentive to like always get these high achieving perfect marks, right? Taking that away and might let students like engage better with the material, right? Like we want to incentivize that. We want to incentivize trying hard instead of incentivizing, like getting like A on the assignment. So those are like 2 sort of lenses through which you could see or evaluate this first reason. Now, this second reason, again, we want to start to think about, so this idea that this proposition, this claim about the world, right? Grades don't provide useful feedback. We want to know a little bit more about what constitutes useful feedback, right? Like if a student messes something up, and I'm sure all of you are going to experience this in this class where you're going to get some feedback from me. Or I'm going to say, yeah, you're on the right track with this, but you got to think about this thing. Or, don't forget in the video when I talked about using the right form and breaking, you need to list the number of premises and then follow that with the conclusion, right? So explaining to a student, how they maybe misunderstood something or potentially did something wrong, like in a math class, like that's not the accurate answer. In a science class, like that's not what this evidence tells us. Letter grades, at the very least, don't tell us a whole lot about that. Like I would think that probably everybody here at some point in their life has just gotten back an assignment and it had like an A, a B, B plus, whatever on it. Like nothing, right? So you didn't really get a good sense of, how you could get better, what you did really well, maybe something that you need to work on. And in that sense, I think that if we're just talking about a letter grade, potentially that is not necessarily useful feedback. When we really dig in and think about, okay, all right, what's our criteria? Thinking about this second reason, what's the criteria for useful feedback? Based off of what I understand grades to be, just like these like A, B, C, D things like written at the top of my paper. Is that an example of useful feedback, right? Is there other kind of feedback that you can get on papers that feels more useful? Or potentially thinking about, the flip side of it, saying like, all right, well, if a professor has a really clear rubric about, why an A paper gets an A, why a B paper gets a B, et cetera, and so on. Maybe grades provide some useful feedback, right? Maybe we have reason to, and in that sense, like as long as there's kind of like a rubric along with the grade written on the paper, we might have reason to reject this reason or at least push back on it a little bit and say, okay, maybe grades aren't the most useful feedback, but it's not right to say that they're not useful. It's not useful at all. Okay. So depending on where you land in evaluating these reasons, thinking through these things, like, is this claim, this proposition, right? This claim about some fact of the matter, some fact in the world, thinking about, what evidence you have for believing that that reason is true. Going through, and if you find like, okay, well, all right, I see kind of both sides to this, this claim, this proposition that grades create bad incentives. But, I don't really think that like they really fully understood. I think there's other ways in which we can think of in like grades being good incentives, right? Or thinking like, okay, maybe grades aren't the most useful feedback, but they still provide some feedback. Maybe they're better than nothing, right? So if you're pushing back on these premises in that way, right, getting a little skeptical, you're not going to think that the conclusion to this argument is very convincing, right? And it's through separating those reasons from that conclusion that you can help land yourself to a place where you actually end up forming your own arguments, right? Coming up with your own reasons for drawing your own conclusion. Because saying, I don't think that the reason number one is good, and I don't think that reason number two is very good. Therefore, I don't think that it's true that professors shouldn't give grades on assignments, right? That is also an argument. All right. Let's try quickly one more example. All right. So we have this is the claim. There are two ways of settling a dispute: by discussion and by physical force. Since the first way is appropriate for human beings and the second way is appropriate for animals, we must resort to force only when we can settle matters by discussion. Okay, so the first thing that we want to recognize here is that it might initially, and you're going to feel this. I know at least some of you are going to feel this when I did, even when I was like coming up with some of the questions on the practice sheet and questions on the module worksheet. Look at some of them and, for a minute thinking like, it seems like the conclusion is there are two ways of settling a dispute by discussion and physical force, right? Especially when we see like, all right, we got the appropriate one is for human beings and the second one is appropriate for animals, right? But then from there, what you want to do is say, okay, wait a second. This claim about resorting to force when we can't settle matters by discussion, it doesn't really fit in with as like support for a claim that there are two ways of settling a dispute. So, and I promise this is something that'll kind of ring in your minds as you're like working on the practice sheet and the module worksheet later on. But there will be times where you are looking at a block of text and you won't have this information here, and it's up to you to just identify the conclusion on your own, and you'll be tempted. It's not always obvious. You know, we don't always have those nice therefore conclusion indicators to tell us the main take home point that someone's trying to make. And when you get to that place where you're like, wait, it could be this one or it could be that one, what you want to do is write it out. You want to put it in. If you want to say it's the first line, for instance, there are two ways of settling a dispute by discussion and physical force, right? You want to write that out as a conclusion, then write out the rest above it as reasons for the argument. And when you put, if you were to do that, if there was that kind of confusion that was happening here in this example, trying to put, we must resort to force only when we can settle matters by discussion, you should see pretty quickly like, hey, actually, maybe I identified this isn't the conclusion, that this isn't the take-home message the person's trying to send me, right? So just to give another, from there, say you realize that you're like, okay, wait, well then what could it be? Like, oh, I wonder actually if it is this last line here, we must resort to force only. Okay, let me try that one, right? And then you do it out this way that I have it up on the PowerPoint. Discussion and physical force are the two methods for resolving disputes. Discussion is the most appropriate method for humans. Physical force is the most appropriate method for animals. Humans can use either discussion or physical force to resolve disputes. Therefore, humans should only resort to physical force when disputes cannot be resolved with discussions. Okay. So, one immediate sort of like red flag that might have popped up to you is like, wait, aren't humans animals, right? So even though we can kind of understand the gist of what someone's going here, right? Like when people like want to distinguish humans from animals, right? And like sort of just dismiss like the fact that like humans are just a subcategory of animals in the same way that like conclusions are subcategories of propositions, right? And from there, I think that you can kind of see like, all right, so, well, what kind of distinction is somebody trying to make there? Well, what they're saying is humans are the animals that are capable of making a choice between using discussion and using force, right? And when presented with that choice, if you have the option of resolving a dispute through discussion, since that's the thing you're capable of, that's the route that you should go, right? So in sort of understanding and evaluating the reasons in an argument with that perspective, you can even resolve maybe some of the issues that arose with how someone framed the original argument. So this argument doesn't necessarily fall apart just because, well, humans are animals too. So doesn't that actually mean that that's like the appropriate way to resolve disputes, since like we're also animals, right? Like you can kind of dig at somebody for messing up that technicality, but then when you step back and you try to think and you look at the reasons, you're like, okay, maybe we need to add this point about humans that I have here in number 4. Humans are the ones who are capable of either discussion or physical force in resolving disputes. Okay, so like when presented with that choice, they should go the route, since they're capable of discussion, they should go that route instead of violence, essentially. Okay, so finally, and I will make this, I will actually, so what I have here is an extra credit option for anyone who wants to get even more practice uh, trying to break down arguments in the way that I went through here. So if you would like, you can take a screen grab from this. I'm not going to be posting it on the Blackboard, in large part because I'm only going to make this available to people who got through the whole lecture video. If you would like me to send you a document, so you don't have to like type all of these questions out, you're more than welcome to send me an email and I can send you a document with this, or you can just rewind and pause the video and copy out these questions. So the if you would like to do the extra credit questions, you would, again, you can email me, ask me to send you a document with all of it written out, or you can just write it out on your own from the lecture slide. And if you would like, so if you submit those to me, you would submit them via email. The extra credit assignment is worth up to 5 points. And if you would like to opt in for this opportunity, I mean, 5 points is actually a lot in this class, since if you didn't notice, there's only 100, all the assignments total out to 100 points. So 5 points actually could have a pretty significant impact on your grade. If you'd like to opt in for that, the deadline for submitting that extra credit is going to be this coming Thursday, July 20th at midnight. So yeah, if you'd like to submit that, you're welcome to do so via email. If you want me to send you a copy of the document with the questions on it, again, just send me an email, ask for that. And thanks for everyone who got to the end of this video, and best of luck working on breaking down those arguments.